While most of y'all are probably been Mad Maxing it around in the new Cyberpunk vehicles, I've been up to my old tricks climbing the vehicles, looking for the vulnerabilities in the out of bounds areas, just to see what the developers have hidden across the horizon. Well, I can tell you that the invisible walls are even stronger than before, and a lot higher than before, to stop us doing exactly this. Not only that, but the developers have made sure that if we have any save files out of bounds from the previous patch, we are over encumbered and can't walk nearly as fast. In fact, we're at such a snail's pace that when we try and swim, we might as well just sink like a stone. This hampered my abilities in trying to find the differences in the new spaceport and if the casino was up and running, but I got in there nonetheless and had a little bit of a poke about. The casino is as it was before, the only difference is I can't spawn vehicles to use as a ladder, and V feels like she weighs a ton. The spaceport has changed dramatically in construction and there is no floor to walk on, so you just fall into the ocean. You can drive around a little bit on the road that's there, but unfortunately it's just completely hollow as it was before. Much like Dogtown, it's very hard to get into. There's invisible walls everywhere, they're very high, and I think the only way you can get in is by using a save file trick. But unfortunately for me, all the save files I have push me out of the area right outside the church next to the animals and the voodoo boys. This of course doesn't matter to most of you because on the old version you're probably stuck with patch 1.6, which doesn't even introduce the hollow version of Dogtown or the new spaceport. But if you're on patch 2.0 and you're looking forward to Phantom Liberty, I managed to get Ryan to look into it and have a poke around just to see if there's anything interesting to find there. Obviously it's completely hollow and there's nothing there to find just now, but we thought it was interesting nonetheless just to see what we could do and find out. I can honestly say that nothing has changed in all the areas I've visited in the past, or at least to my eye nothing's changed. There are obviously some new secrets involved in patch 2.0 which we'll talk about in another video, but for now most of the areas are as they were in subsequent patches, and most of these areas might well change in the new Phantom Liberty DLC. I'm hoping obviously that with the spaceport being hollow and Dogtown being hollow, that the casino will be included as well, and the other unused areas will be included, like the Miltech building, Crunch Plaza, and other various bits and bobs that we've discovered in the past but seem to have gone completely by the wayside. Ryan also discovered a brand new area out of bounds which wasn't there before, and we think this is for a flashback area which is very similar to those of Johnny Silverhand in the Hammer Club and things like that. So these areas are well outside of the Night City that we know and love, and they're completely out of the way so we don't see them when we're playing the game. At least we're not supposed to see them, but people like me tend to do so. I suppose one really ironic thing is that we wish for the monorail system to be back in the game, and it is, but it seriously hinders our exploration of buildings trying to use a monorail to get up to them. But I suppose that's fair enough, and we can also use the monorail to ride on top of it, providing there's no invisible walls every seam of the track. So with my exploration done of patch 2.0 in relation to Out of Bounds, I'll pass on to Ryan where he's going to talk about what he's found, and also he's going to talk about the features of patch 2.0 and his opinions of the performance and what you should do if you're willing to go back to Cyberpunk and play Phantom Liberty.
As Mike mentioned, it is pretty hard to get into Dogtown using manual methods, obviously, without using mods or exploits. But I found that the easiest method without resorting to a whole lot of jumping up barriers and using various card tricks to try and get through was to just get to this spot right here in the previous version of the game, and then to make your way into Dogtown from here, because it's far enough out that it won't teleport you instantly back to the entrance of Pacifica like it does in almost any other area where you save your game in a previous version. But it also is an area that's fairly easy to get to in previous versions. You can either use various jumping methods or methods with cars to get up to this location. So whether you're on PC or on console, you should be able to get to this spot right here in version 1.63. And then from there, you can make your way into Dogtown, like so. Another channel that we follow, Secreto, was actually first to post footage of exploring Dogtown, so rather than rehashing all of that, I'm just going to share a little bit of my own exploration, and then we'll put up links to check out Secreto's videos, also including some exploration of the new spaceport, which is also all low detail and has no collision at the moment. But I did find a few interesting things when looking around. I found this message, which I believe this is Turkish, not Arabic, and then a reference to the mass driver, which of course is something that we've talked about a little bit before. But it's interesting just kind of looking around at this area and seeing some of the stuff that we've seen in concept art and trailers, and looking at it without a bunch of garbage and NPCs and stuff in the way. So I just, I found it a little bit interesting to wander around, but definitely more on this later. I did do a stream on my personal channel where I poked around in here for a few hours. Feel free to check that out, but I'm just showing off a couple of the more interesting vistas, like up inside the stadium from above. And I got here by climbing, by the way. It was a pain. I didn't use any exploits or trainers or anything. Mike likes it when I do it legit, but yeah, I feel like that's enough for now, but we will use more of this footage later. Something I did notice while traveling out of bounds that I thought was interesting was a change to the terrain in one of the scenes where you teleport out to the edge of the map. And if my memory serves correctly, this is one of the Johnny flashbacks. Now, before this patch, this was just a little spot of texture on the ground, like a lot of these scenes are. But now there's a raised piece of terrain here that actually has, grass detail objects and stuff on top of it. Now, it's possible that they changed the layout of that scene. I would have to go back and do them all and get out of bounds and take a look. But my guess is that this actually has something to do with the same reason that the BD school is floating up in the air, is that this scene has its own effects filters. And so, in order to make sure that no random weather effects or anything distract in it, they might have raised it up just so it's above, fog or any other things that can happen randomly that would mess with their desired lighting effects for the scene. So that's just a guess I'm throwing out as to why they raised this terrain. The other thing is it could be that the scene now takes place underneath the map inside this hill, just so it's not easy to see these locations, but I haven't noticed any changes like that to other ones. So just something I thought was kind of curious, but more on that in the future if it turns out to be anything interesting. My overall feeling with 2.0 in general is that the game really has come into its own. Now, I've felt that way for quite a while about the game, but even to the lofty standards that a lot of people have applied to this game from the moment it launched, I think it meets and exceeds most of them. It really is a very impressive game engine. And I have definitely noticed hits to performance, specifically a lot more CPU usage, but I feel like they're using it to do the right things. Like, for example, they have drastically increased the chance of weather patterns happening, and it's still not nearly as much as some of the weather mods, which don't work anymore because of the changes to the weather system, but it's enough that you get more atmosphere out of the game. And so I feel like it's a kind of a compromise between CDProjektred originally being like, no, it's never supposed to rain in California in the future, like it's just not realistic, versus people being like, okay, well, it looks pretty awesome in a cyberpunk world when it's raining or when there's acid clouds, etc. So that's a change that I'm really happy about, is that weather doesn't happen frequently, but it does happen when you're walking through the city, which almost never was the case before unless you activated a scene that caused the weather to change. Another thing that's burning up your CPU is a significant increase in the amount of NPCs that are not part of the random crowds, but are put in specific places, and some of them have basic routines. It used to be kind of annoying in areas like, for example, this apartment where there was no one here besides you and these weird card-playing robots, whereas now you actually have neighbors around in the building, and there are a number of places like this besides just the areas that have received changes, like the new apartments, where they never really rebalanced NPCs or added them into some of the probably the last areas completed in the game. So definitely the changes to NPC density and more of them that are doing things rather than just wandering around is pretty cool. One of my absolute favorite immersion changes that also has to do with NPCs though is they have finally fixed to where in areas where a gig or a mission has taken place, the areas are no longer hostile, and also NPCs will repopulate them and the businesses will reopen. Now, what I'm talking about, for example, is there's a few places where there's a bar or a restaurant, and you do a gig or something there and you shoot a bunch of people, and it stays hostile and never repopulates with NPCs. Now, this seems to vary a little bit depending on what game version you're in and what game version you finish the gigs. But in general, on most completed Cyberpunk files, there would be tons of random businesses that just never reopened after you shot some people one time, and are permanently hostile on your map if you went through them. And so now all of these places will actually repopulate. And the cool thing is in the case of the bars, they will actually be empty during the day and the employees will be cleaning up. And then at night, they'll populate with people partying, and there will be DJs, dancers, etc. And you can dance on the dance floors with other people actually there, not with a hostile box on your screen. It's amazing. So I know a lot of people, just for immersion, have wanted to go back to the bars and clubs and just dance around. And now you can finally do that. It's really kind of an annoying thing when you try to wander around in the world for a long time after you finish the game and you want to just kind of do stuff and have fun and be immersed and do photo mode stuff, and there's a bunch of stuff that's basically broken around the map, and a lot of that, or all of it from what I've seen, seems to be fixed now, and I'm really happy about that for the sake of immersion. I'm really liking the new skills and perks, the crime system, and car combat, all of which you'll see combined in this clip. Now, it's pretty cool that the cops are around on patrol and will stop you and respond to crimes, but what's really neat is that it seems to work similar to the faction system in Souls games, where police, gang members, and corporations are all a faction and seem to be aware of what faction they are. So it's not just that police will stop you. For example, you will see fights between random gangs or between gangs and the police, and if a gang is hostile to another gang, or if a police officer comes within contact of a gang fight, they will join in and will fight against anyone who is not on their side and will team up with anyone who is. So I found that to be really cool and a neat way to do it, especially because it works pretty well in the Souls games, where random events can turn into pretty cool little battles like this one here, where two gangs were fighting and this cop was walking down the street, a bullet whizzed past him and he decided to join in. I've only had a chance to do a few hours worth of normal gameplay, but the changes, for example, like being able to use things like Kerenzikov and Sandevistan when you're driving, add a lot of fun to the gameplay, and things like doing dismount attacks. It really adds a lot to the fun factor and what you're doing while you're playing, rather than feeling sort of like, people have called the game a GTA clone, and I think a lot of that comes down to that you don't feel like a lot of times that you're doing that much different than you were in a game from 2013. It looks cool, it's a cyberpunk world, but you're pretty much just driving around from A to B, shooting a bunch of people, grabbing the thing, etc. Whereas now you're doing a lot of stuff that you definitely do not do in those other games, like flying through the air out of your car window and hitting people with a chainsaw sword. And it really kind of gives you that over-the-top cyberpunk feeling that I think was advertised from way back in the early teasers, and that built a lot of those expectations. The last thing I want to chip in here is whether or not I believe you should start a new file, as CDProjektred recommends, to play Phantom Liberty. Now, a lot of us are kind of interpreting that as start a new file with 2.0 so that you're about the right level to start Phantom Liberty. But regardless of how you look at it, from what I've seen so far with the 2.0 patch, I would say your mileage may vary based on how well you know the game map and how quickly you could go back to all the gig and mission locations, because the main thing I've noticed is that they've put a lot of the rare cosmetics and crafting components in little boxes scattered around gig locations, and you would have to go back and get those to get a lot of clothing styles you missed, for example, for transmog. Now, yes, I guess I can see that, and there are some other changes to gameplay that can make the missions more fun and interesting. But besides that, I would say if you're pretty familiar with the game's map and you could pretty quickly run around to a lot of the notable locations and grab the new loot boxes full of clothing items, etc., that they've scattered around there, I would honestly say you're probably fine using your existing file and just jumping into Phantom Liberty if you don't really have, a solid 30 hours to do another complete Cyberpunk file in the next week or so. So yeah, definitely your mileage may vary. It's up to you. If you had a kind of a crappy playthrough playing a long time ago, it may be worth it to you to fire up the game again and get your file to about, I think they said 25, 27, something like that is the recommended level to start Phantom Liberty. So you might find that it's worth it to go back through the game without bugs and glitches, of which I've seen almost zero, and with a lot of improvements that make the gameplay more fun. But for people who have been playing it at least somewhat over the last 3 years, I would say just hop straight into Phantom Liberty and do the new stuff. It's not that different, but that's just my take. Back to you, Mike.
So in a nutshell, that's Deconstructing the game's version of patch 2.0 review in relation to Out of Bounds and the features included in patch 2.0. We will of course go into the finer details of the weapon systems of the vehicles, perk systems, and whether or not you should change up your playstyle for the subsequent Phantom Liberty DLC. My name's Mike, this has been Deconstructing the Game, and as always, I'll catch you later.